coach welcomed him to the team and told him he'd run the 400 meter and occasionally the 200 meter. I will never forget the first track meet in which he was to run the 400. It was a cool day, so the team members wore sweatsuits over their silks. Immediately, this concerned me because it meant Ronald would have to take off his sweatpants in order to run, which also meant he'd have to take off his shoes and put them on again. At the time, Ronald still occasionally put his shoes on the wrong feet, so I was worried about the possible embarrassment of that. He also tied his shoes the way he did when he first learned to do it. One of the characteristics of his autism is that once he learns how to do something, he does it that way every time. The shoes were likely to come untied during the run. Sure enough, when it was time to get ready, Ronald took off his shoes and put them back on the wrong feet. I was watching this through the lens of a camcorder because I promised I'd tape his run. I was too far away to call to him, but one of his teammates knelt close to him and discreetly pointed out the shoe situation. Ronald changed them. He went to the starting line. I kept thinking to myself, is it wrong to put him through this? Will he just be embarrassed? What does this prove? The gun sounded and Ronald began. He fell immediately behind. But that was okay because I knew his objective was to run the full 400 without stopping or falling.
631.
631, go ahead.
Make $1,800 for a teacher-student dispute.
You know, police officers are frequently called to situations that are involving children who are either in trouble or they're in crisis. Officers don't have a whole lot of time to spend in trying to get to know that person, that child. And it's really difficult to determine, I think, for a lot of officers, how to resolve an issue. And especially when you don't have a diagnosis. You're not a doctor. You don't know if this child is suffering from a mental health issue or why they're behaving in the manner in which they are. But I think through education and through producing a video and making police officers more aware of the high number of kids out there that suffer from mental health issues, that they can now maybe begin to detect other things that are going on inside, you know, that person, and maybe help them resolve it. Because I think that when you have awareness, that leads to an understanding.
Research studies estimate that 20% of adolescents are living with a serious mental or behavioral health issue that significantly impacts their daily lives. What is even more alarming is that over 3/4 of those children and teens do not receive any mental health services. Therefore, many families and professionals rely on us to assist during a crisis with a child or teen. The outcome for children and teens with mental health issues is far more negative than their peers. 50% of juveniles with a mental disorder age 14 and older drop out of school. They are also far more likely to become homeless and are 3 times more likely to get arrested. 70% of youth involved in the juvenile justice system suffer from a mental health issue.
There are a whole range, obviously, of mental health issues that law enforcement is going to encounter. And everything from psychosis to whatever to just simple attitude problem.
Adolescents developmentally don't want to be different. They want to determine how they're different. So to have any sort of a chronic illness, to be diagnosed with any sort of thing during adolescence is a unique challenge.
Well, it debilitates them. Most of the kids that I've ever seen come through here that have dropped out of school, dropped out for reasons of mental illness. They can't complete their work, they're absent a lot, they don't focus, they're in such pain that school is not a priority. So in terms of their education, it falls apart.
And then if you are out of school, if you're hospitalized, no adolescent wants to say, I've been hospitalized in a psychiatric locked hospital.
It is important that all of us remember that mental illness is not the result of weak character, lack of intelligence, or caused by parents.
When you start talking about mental illness in children, everyone gets a little bit nervous. And, you know, people worry about, are we throwing labels on children? Are these kind of heavy-duty labels that they're going to carry with them? I think if there wasn't so much stigma surrounding mental illness, we wouldn't be so worried about using a label to describe a child.
Although there are several different mental health and developmental disabilities that impact juveniles, We will be focusing on 3 specific conditions. By the end of this video, you will have a better understanding of ADHD, autism, and depression, the causes, signs, and symptoms of these health diagnoses, and effective strategies in dealing with juveniles with these conditions. When you are called to assist with a crisis, safety is the priority. Whenever possible, ask a parent, guardian, or teacher if the child has a history of medical or mental health issues.
Hello, folks.
Hi.
What are you doing today?
We've had better days.
Yeah. What's going on today?
I can't get her to she's been disrupting the class. I had to clear the class out. I can't get her to sit down and take any direction or redirect.
Children with ADHD will display a variety of symptoms, which might include difficulty paying attention, being easily distracted, disorganized work habits, difficulty finishing tasks such as chores or homework. They always seem on the go. They have difficulty taking turns, and they might display inappropriate behaviors that might seem immature for their age. Many of these symptoms occur from time to time in any youngster. However, in children with ADHD, they occur frequently at home and at school. They also interfere with the child's ability to function normally.
There are many misconceptions on what causes ADHD. Some of those misconceptions suggest that food additives and diet cause ADHD. Some believe ADHD is caused by environmental issues such as poor parenting. The myth of poor parenting is the most difficult to dispel. Actually, children with ADHD may have parents who are not equipped with the skills to effectively parent a child with this condition and tend to have intensified symptoms. Medical professionals believe that the cause of ADHD is an imbalance of chemicals in the brain.
Like a lot of times people think that a diagnosis of ADHD is kind of an easy way out, or it's an excuse for behavior, and that it's not really taken as serious as it really is. And from my experience and from what I've read is that ADHD is a chemical imbalance that it needs and it deserves to have professional assistance to help address it.
This is my baby, the one that I'll brag about, and to me he was your typical everyday child. I was getting these calls saying that he was verbally abusive, swearing, throwing tantrums, and I was like, yeah, right, you're lying on my son, because he didn't have those behaviors at home. So that started in January, and I believe it was June 6th of '97, I saw for myself. We were out at a park over by 35E, and he was just hyper or whatever, and I told him to sit down, and my cousin's son walked past him, and he just got up and grabbed him by the neck and just threw him down on the ground for no reason. And so I'm like, oh, you done did it now. And I chased him for about a half an hour, 45 minutes. And from that day on, he was hospitalized like 5 times between June and November before I even got any type of help. And I was like, oh, my baby going crazy. And it was like it took actually 8 police officers to hold him down.
Untreated ADHD tends to lead to then kids becoming really depressed about their inability to manage themselves, and eventually they kind of give up on that altogether, and many of them go on to develop really bad conduct disorder problems. If the ADHD is treated successfully early on, you can really prevent a lot of those secondary things from developing. And right now we're saying that probably 2/3 or as much as maybe 70% of kids who are involved with juvenile justice have at least one mental health disorder. And the at least one is what is important, because maybe 50% have at least 2 diagnoses. Many, roughly that same percentage or maybe higher, also has a co-occurring chemical dependency problem. So all of these things tend to get woven together, and ending up at juvenile justice is unfortunately still a way too likely outcome.
ADHD is characterized by inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsiveness. Of course, you might think these 3 words describe just about every young child that we might encounter on a daily basis. However, ADHD affects between 5 to 15% of children ages 5 to 17.
Symptoms of ADHD can be seen as early as 18 months, but it's usually diagnosed at about 5 or 6 upon entry into school.
When we have controlled samples and examine all of the kids very carefully, we get a higher estimate about how many kids we think are affected in the total population than we're actually diagnosing.
Even though many girls suffer from ADHD, boys are more likely to be diagnosed. These children are often called troublemakers and spoiled brats, and if undiagnosed, they may go through life labeled as lazy or dumb. Juveniles with ADHD often fail to pay close attention to details, fidget with their hands or feet, squirm in their seats, move excessively, or feels restless. They may seem to be always on the go, or act as if they are driven by a motor.
Well, number one is teaching them to recognize when they are starting to feel agitated or starting to feel like they're losing control, so they can let someone know that they need a timeout, just a time to regroup. Those kids might not necessarily recognize them cognitively, but they might recognize the physical symptoms in themselves. So they could feel themselves, their heart start to race, or maybe the butterflies in the stomach, or maybe they start to feel their face turn red, or they feel hot, or their teeth are clenching.
You may have kids in your building that it's just, they're moving nonstop, and it's just like, wow, that's without a doubt ADHD. And then you may have another student who is just easily distracted, and that's different levels of ADHD.
Do not seem to listen when spoken to directly. Have difficulty organizing tasks and activities, including not following through on tasks or losing things needed to complete a task or activity. Are easily distracted by extraneous stimuli. Many juveniles with ADHD talk excessively and show an inability to listen to others. They have difficulty with social skills, such as taking turns and not interrupting or intruding on others. A child with ADHD is often the kid who talks out and acts out without thinking of the consequences, which in turn puts them in volatile situations where first responders are called to intervene. When encountering an issue with a juvenile with ADHD, here are a few strategies to help you interact more effectively. Safety is first. Whenever possible, obtain the history. Stay calm.
I would want the police officers just to be very calm, very direct, but letting them know the consequences that follow from that choice of behavior.
Be professional and patient.
People need to have an incredible amount of patience, because the reality is a lot of these kids don't come across as very likable. So it can be real easy to say they're just being a brat, when there are all kinds of things that are going on in these kids' lives that they have absolutely no control over.
Use the juvenile's name often. Use clear, simple one-step directions. Remember, individuals with ADHD have difficulties with attention. So by the time you have told them a series of commands, they might have forgotten what you said in the beginning. Give the juvenile an out. Because of their impulsivity and inability to see the consequences of their actions, juveniles with ADHD need assistance in problem solving. Don't be confrontational, give ultimatums, or use idle threats. Redirect the juvenile and reassure him or her that you are here to help them problem solve.
You should also always have developed a plan of action that you will implement prior to even having to move to the steps of contacting the police. One of the things that you want to do is know that students have people that they can be assigned to, or people that they would work with in your building. Now that would include not only the advisor or an advocate, but also you would have your nurse, you would have a social worker, you'd even have your school psychologist involved. And in many instances now, we know that many schools will also have a mental health support person that not necessarily on staff, but is in the building and supported in some other type of way. So you would want to know that These are people who can give you some support as you help this child work through this crisis.